So here we are in July of 17, and I come back to the game, and I feel like all kinds of great things started happening as soon as I got back into it. First thing, big naval battle again, no big shock. Wearing my arm out, just rolling the dice, but it was I think under 2 hours this time. The Germans decided to pull away rather than try to fight it to the bitter end. And it was less decisive, still a major German victory, as usual, against three of the different Allied powers, Britain, France, and Italy. Smashed their national wills down, did not get control of the North Sea because they didn't want to fight it. They weren't willing to fight it out forever. So, all the big offensives start. The French offensive had already started in the spring, but in June, all the rest, the Italian, the German, and the Russian offensives all started. See what happened, because it was pretty exciting, actually. I think we did the East Front first, forcing the Germans to go first, and they punched through using their assault troops. They didn't actually get any advantage off the assault troops, so they aren't going to be able to increase their production on them. But they did manage to grab loads and 3 hexes anyhow, just because of the advantages of flash bombardment and the Russian army. I'm not entirely sure how. Maybe just those bigger units were big enough to crush them over. Anyhow, the other big thing is that German morale being so high helped. But that's been there before. So I don't know why it worked this time and it didn't work the turn before, especially when I'm hitting a hex that was obvious, but we'll see. The Russian counterattack. Russian counterattack smashed against the Germans. What's that, Krakow? Yeah. Alright. So they smashed against the Germans at Krakow and not only failed, but the army routed. The Russian army routed. And that halts their offensive immediately, threw their national will down the toilet well below 20, and put them into some serious problems. Not a lot happened in the Balkans. The Greeks attacked the Turks, and they got hurt kind of bad. And then, well, we got Yudanovich marching forward slowly towards Armenia. As soon as he gets into Armenia, the Turks are going to be able to fight a little better, but they got one more city before they get there, Ezra. The Brits, because of the low national will from the naval battle, did not press the attack. The Turks took attacks from the Greeks and Russians, so they may not have been able to anyhow. Okay, all good so far. And we go over, and the French front. Somehow or another, the French army managed to panic in its attack to the west of Sauerbrot. And not only did their army rout, but they failed the national will war weariness check afterwards, and it actually drove them all the way down to the -6 space on the board. That's about as bad as it gets. Yet still, it was less than a 50% chance that they'd collapse. They had 2 shots at it, one at revolution and one at actual surrender. They managed to succeed in both by 1, with all the modifiers, etc. in place. They actually had a reed roll in their hands, which they had to use once, but they managed to survive it. So now their national will is right back up there. But what this does show is just how, a little earlier the game looked unwinnable for the Centrals. Well, it's a crapshoot at this point. Any country could have its army crack, although up at that high morale level it's not going to happen. But if your army routs and your major offensive fails, which could just happen on a die roll essentially, then you could end up in a position where some bad rolls get you down to that -6 spot and oops, you're surrendering or you're in a revolution. A Likewise, the Italians launched an offensive. Theirs has effectively failed. They launched it on Trent again. But their army did not panic. Instead, it just got wiped out. And at this point, they pretty much have to call the offensive off. But they waited until they get their national will up through the government collapsing. So every single one of the Entente governments collapsed. And they're all up at a pretty good level now because of that. We didn't see a lot of movement over on the parliament. I think the Russians fell. British actually gained. The French fell. That's the big factor as you go later and later in the war. The ugly part is after the interphase, the Austrians are down to defeatism again, which means if they get into bad shape, it's much harder for them to survive it. Okay, so starting the new turn, rolled up some events, one of which is Portugal just entered the war. And not a big deal, they got one corps, it's integrated into the British Army. But what is perhaps a little bit bigger deal is they've got 2 African units. And so they're going to start picking away at the German African territories. This is pretty much the end note for the German advances there. There's a little pile of British and French units that are going to harass them. So that little playground is going to end now with the Portuguese in it. Even I mean, they're not that big a swing, but their units are as good as the British and French. All right.